Hi, welcome to Change on the Brain, where we look at the best research into the mind and brain so that you can build effective skills on good science. So, imagine this. You're about to write your final exam, or you're about to give a big presentation. How do you feel in your body? Your heart is pounding, you start to breathe faster, and your body is just trembling. Now, I know this because for me it happened quite recently, actually, just last Friday at the TEDx event. Now, what do you try and do with those stress feelings? Alison Woodbrooks at Harvard asked people exactly that question in a study she did in 2013. So what do you guess that they said? The overwhelming answer, 85% of people said, I try to relax and calm down. But what if calming down is sometimes exactly the wrong thing to do? So let me ask you another question. When you feel that stress in your body, do you view it as a good thing or a sign that you're not doing very well? Do you feel, and I like how Ali Crum at Stanford puts it, stressed about being stressed? But what if instead we understood those stress feelings for what they really are? The sound of a Formula One engine revving up and vibrating at the starting line. That pounding heart and trembling, it's the feeling of our high-performance fuel delivery system. It's delivering oxygen, glucose, and performance-enhancing neurotransmitters to our brain. And we can learn how to use that power to do something that matters to us, in the same way as an F1 driver has to learn to power their precision-engineered machine with the accelerator pedal. So changing our understanding that biologically, stress isn't something that you fight, it's something that you use, is called the stress is enhancing mindset. And installing this mindset in your thoughts is how we can learn to use the power being generated by our stress system. But I don't want you to just believe me. I want you to be convinced that it's true based on solid science in psychology and neuroscience, and then proved not just in a clean lab, but in the messy real world. And if you need to take your time, no problem. It took me 2 years of research to be convinced. So I respect your skepticism. Now, I'm a teacher and a learning, communications, and development coach. And I have 2 passions. Number 1, to dig deep into the research and understand how the mind and brain works. Then 2, people's development. I love to bring those research insights to my clients so that they can use them to do their exciting things. And honestly, sharing in their journeys and learning from them is one of the privileges of my life. So let me ask you a coaching question. Can you remember doing something important to you and you were stressed, but you used the energy of your stress to perform better? For me, I first noticed it in my university final exams. Weeks of preparing was stressful. The day of the exam was stressful. But when I picked up that pen to write, in between all the stress and uncertainty, there was another feeling, an anticipation, an excitement even. And then I used the energy of stress to focus and write for 3 hours. So our plan for today, I'm going to take you on my journey to this research insight. I'm going to explain how it works in the brain and the body. And then, if you're convinced, I'll give you a couple of ideas about how you can start using it. Now, this research journey is personal to me because I used to be very shy and very stressed when speaking in public. To be honest, I was a little terrified of speaking to people at a party. I had real social anxiety. Maybe some of you can relate. I once had to give a 1-minute presentation in a competition when I was 14, and I made it 30 seconds before I totally blanked and froze. And the judge in the competition told me she was very disappointed in me, which was not helpful. Now, if you had told 14-year-old me that I'd be doing this one day, I would have laughed and then probably run off. But I didn't want to stay that way. So I decided to start figuring out how to handle stressful situations by understanding my mind and then putting myself into challenging situations and then actively managing my thoughts. Now, honestly, sometimes I've gone a little too far. So while I was studying law in the UK, I even signed up for the Royal Marines selection process to see how far I could push myself. It was quite challenging. 100 people came on day one, and by the end of the second weekend, where they kept us awake for 2 days, there was just 30 of us left who passed into the training program. And what I figured out by experience is that what you think in your mind has a big impact on the performance that you can do. So since then, I've added research into the mind and brain to my intuitive experimentation. For example, Alia Crum at Stanford is one of the leading researchers in the impact of mindsets on performance. And she did a study with the Navy SEALs in 2020 of their selection process. Now, if you don't know, the Navy SEALs are arguably the most elite special force on the planet. And the selection process is brutal. 80% of candidates fail. And she made an interesting discovery about the candidates. So would you like to hear her discovery? Actually, there'll be a research gift for you in the description for this TEDx talk on YouTube. I've been researching the mind for 10 years, but the advances in AI over the past year are a researcher's dream. So I used to have difficulty finding good discussions of papers. So I created an experimental YouTube channel called Change on the Brain, where I post AI-powered discussion podcasts on specific studies. And you can even ask questions during the podcasts live to the AI hosts about the paper. So should we hear Crum's discovery? So interestingly, she found that not all Navy SEAL candidates viewed stress as enhancing, even at this elite level. But for candidates who did, who said things like, experiencing stress enhances my performance. The question was, did they then perform any better? What was the performance of the stresses enhancing candidates?
Oh, that is a fantastic question, and you are jumping right to the heart of the data.
It really is. Those specific candidates who believed stress was an asset actually saw some pretty incredible results.
Yeah, let's look at the numbers. They actually lasted 12% longer in the entire training program.
And on the week 1 obstacle course, they were a full 27 seconds faster than average. Plus, they got 30% fewer negative comments from their instructors and 60% fewer from peers.
And then you can check if their answers are accurate by reading from the research papers for yourself. It's such an exciting time to be learning. But back to the research. So, people with a stresses enhancing mindset had better performance. But could changing to the stresses enhancing mindset improve our performance? Does changing your thoughts about stress change your performance? Alison Woodbrooks, in that 2013 study at Harvard, she theorized that when you're stressed or anxious, your body is highly activated and it feels bad. So it's actually pretty hard to go down from anxious and then across to calm, which feels good. Wouldn't it be easier to go from activated bad straight across to activated good? And we have a word for that, don't we? Excited. So she got people to come into the lab and do something stressful. So what do humans find stressful? Public speaking and being judged. So she asked people to give a presentation to a panel of judges. So to test if just changing thoughts about stress improved performance. In one group, she asked people to say to themselves behind the curtain, "I'm excited," before they presented to the judges. So did it make a difference? Did just saying "I'm excited" shift people from anxiety to excitement and improve their performance? So when they got the results back from the independent raters, the I'm excited group was rated 17% better in the quality of their presentations. So just changing thoughts about stress had improved performance during a stressful action. So what is going on here? There's a model in psychology by Blaskovich and Mendez that when you face a challenge, like a big job interview, your brain does a super fast accounting calculation of whether you have the resources to succeed or not. And if the result of that calculation is that you don't, you panic and you go into what's called a threat state. Now it's a little bit bleak, but the threat state basically squeezes your blood vessels in the periphery of your body, so the parts away from your core, like your arms and your legs, to try and centralize your blood into the core so that you bleed less and hopefully don't bleed to death. I think the rabbit in Zootropolis illustrated the danger best. The threat state is basically your body activating Armadillo mode. And it lasts for a long time because it uses a lot of long-lasting cortisol. But it's not just activated by physical dangers. Your body uses the same stress system for physical stresses, like tigers about to maul you, as for social stresses, like unfriendly people judging your public speaking. So big social stresses can also trigger Armadillo mode. But on the other hand, if your brain thinks you do have what it takes to succeed, your body goes into a challenge state, Formula One mode. Your heart pumps hard, but your blood vessels open up and carry oxygen and glucose on an express highway to deliver powerful energy to your limbs and your brain so that you can succeed at the challenge. It's pushing the accelerator on the Formula One car and getting more power. And then, after the challenge, your body returns to baseline quickly because it's mainly adrenaline and not cortisol. Now, Jeremy Jameson, who's now head of psychology at Rochester, had an idea that when we view stress as debilitating, so in other words, we feel our heart pounding and our hands shaking, and we think, oh no, this is a bad sign, I'm going to fail, we're actually accidentally putting the powerful resources of our stress response on the wrong side of the scale. We're seeing them as a liability, when in fact, they're a powerful resource. So Jameson wondered if you could move them over to the right side of the scale just by changing the person's understanding of their body's reaction. So would it change the body's stress response? So Jameson got people into the lab and he taught them the stress is enhancing mindset. That pounding heart, that's good. That's your body preparing you for action. That faster breathing, good. You're oxygenating your blood, sending it to your brain. You're sweating, good. Your body is cooling you down for high performance. And your brain is also releasing noradrenaline, which can help you think better. He wanted to teach them that stress is opening up the full capability of your F1 car. To see if it worked in the lab, he wanted to cause them real stress. So of course, public speaking. But he wanted it to be even more stressful. Now, there are ethical limits to what you can do to people, but there is one experiment that is legal, the possibly evil Trier social stress test. And the secret is that you crank up the judgment factor, because this time the panel of judges have been specially trained to show you that they're disappointed in you. So they've been trained to sigh and roll their eyes and shake their heads. Now, I'm not sure if there's a Mean Girls boot camp that they go to, but it definitely works. All the participants were hooked up to heart monitors and their hearts started pounding like a speed metal drummer. Now, Jameson came from a biology background to psychology. So he also had the participants hooked up to an impedance cardiography device. He was looking for the physical signature of Armadillo mode and F1 mode. And when he checked the normal group, the stress of the public speaking and judgment tightened up their blood vessels as you'd expect from a big social stressor. It was enough to push the body's panic button. Armadillo mode activated. Then he checked the "this is your body preparing you for action" group. Their blood vessels had stayed wide open. Changing the way they thought about their stress had been enough to change their body's blood vessel response. Now, you may have heard this in Kelly McGonigal's excellent TED Talk on the health benefits of the stresses-enhancing mindset. But what you may not know is the effect on thinking performance. Because maybe the blood vessels squeeze, which is bad for your health, but at least cognitive performance stays good. So Jameson wanted to know if the mindset improved performance in a tough intellectual task. So he set up an experiment with college students taking the GRE, which is the entrance exam if you want to do a PhD at Harvard, for example. It's nearly 4 hours long. It's a monster. And he taught them that this is your body preparing you for action. Then he made them take an entire GRE mock exam. And when he looked at the results, the stresses enhancing group had scored 55 points higher on the math component. But a test in a clean, air-conditioned lab with a practice test, would it work in the real world? So the researchers waited for them to take the actual exam. 3 long months they had to wait for that data. Now, for context, at the time, a score in the high 700s on the math part of the GRE was required by top universities. And when they checked it, the normal group got 700. And the stresses enhancing group, 770. So a stresses enhancing mindset improved mental performance as well. So I wanted to know what's happening in the brain that might explain this. So earlier this year, I discovered Amy Arnsten, who's a professor of neuroscience at Yale University. And she studies the impact of stress on the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex, just here, is the thinking, deciding, planning, complex problem solver of your brain. It's very useful in that GRE exam. It's powerful, but it is a little slow. And she discovered a fascinating mechanism. The brain is very sensitive to your feeling of being in or out of control. If the brain decides the situation is out of your control, or in other words, you don't have the resources to succeed, she found that it will trigger a massive spike in neurotransmitters, amplified by the cortisol of Armadillo mode. And then she discovered the chemical switch that turns off the prefrontal cortex and switches you into your automatic systems. And this makes sense, right? If your brain views the situation and thinks, I have no control here, it would make sense for the complex problem solver to hand over to the emergency systems and strongest habits and say, just get us out of here. So it got me wondering, has anyone done any research into challenge threat evaluations and prefrontal cortex activity? And just 3 weeks ago, I found a paper done in 2025 by Jameson and his colleagues, and they were studying paramedics doing the OSCE, which is the Objective Standard Clinical Evaluation. An OSCE is a highly stressful simulated medical emergency. So a student walks into a room and a patient is crashing. Alarms are going off and they get graded by senior doctors on their clinical decisions, physical execution under pressure. It's basically the TRIA social stress test with a defibrillator. So they wanted to know what happens in the thinking brain, the prefrontal cortex, if you view the situation as a challenge that you can overcome or a threat that you don't have the resources to overcome. Now, they had carefully selected students who all had 5.0 GPAs, which is A's. So they were objectively knowledgeable. And so for those students who were going into that room, they assessed whether they were in a threat or in a challenge state before taking the exam. One of the questions before the task was, how well do you think you can manage the demands imposed on you by this task? And then, while they were taking the exam, they were wearing an FNIRs headband, which measure prefrontal cortex activity by using near-infrared light, which passes through your skull to check whether the blood is oxygenated or not. It's like an X-ray to watch brain activity. And the students who entered the exam room in a threat state, the experimenters watched as that thinking brain activity just went dark. Prefrontal cortex activity dropped by 45%. But the participants in the challenge state, their prefrontal cortex, their thinking brain activity stayed high. You know that feeling when you're in a stressful situation and your brain just goes blank? So the students had the same knowledge as proved by their GPAs. But what made the difference was their interpretation of their resources. And this is the research thread that I was following for 2 years. And then in my research, I struck research gold. These early studies were great, but they had pretty small sample sizes. So in 2019, Jeremy Jameson teamed up with David Yeager, who is a master of doing scientific studies with large sample sizes in the messy, stress-filled, real world of high school education. Is there much social judgment at high school in your experience? They wanted to test what would happen if you combine a stress-enhancing mindset with a growth mindset. Now, the growth mindset is the understanding that the physical brain changes in response to difficult practice, what's called neuroplasticity. And this has been proved by lots of studies. Your abilities are not set in stone by your genetics. When you've experienced difficulty, it doesn't show that you don't have the capability. It just shows that you're still growing the ability. So they taught the stresses enhancing mindset and growth mindsets in a 30-minute online module in 6 studies to test and retest the ideas we've been talking about today. And then they submitted the paper to Nature, which is one of the toughest journals to get your paper published in. It's like the Oscars of scientific journals. They reject 85 to 90% of the papers they receive. And it took nearly a year and a half for Nature to peer review it. So they confirmed the results that we just talked about with 360 people. But it was study 5 that really surprised me. This is where science sometimes has an accidental study design way bigger than they were hoping for. So they decided to teach 118 high school students the mindsets in late 2019. And their plan was to check their cortisol 3 times per day and then wait the few months to check their final real grades at the end of the semester in 2020. 2020. Can you remember what happened in early 2020? That's right. They were plunged into the once-in-a-generation stress-inducing COVID world lockdown. So you can imagine the curiosity of the researchers when they checked the final transcript of the students at the end of the semester in 2020. They checked who passed the most difficult courses, the STEM courses, science, technology, engineering, maths. They got the results, and 47% of the normal students passed. And the group where they taught the stresses enhancing mindset, 63% of them passed their core subjects. So let's say you're convinced, or perhaps cautiously open. How would you start installing the stresses enhancing mindset into your thoughts? The most important principle is that you can't just start on your most stressful experiences. The reason for this is that when you're stressed, it means that you're facing one of your most important goals. And with those high stakes, your brain is not interested in using new, shaky ideas that you heard that one time in a TEDx talk. So, to install it deep in your habit systems, learn this phrase. This is my body preparing me for action. I'm excited. And I mean memorize it. Practice it many, many times until you can wake up in the middle of the night sleepy and say it. I also recommend a good mental image. So use this F1 metaphor. It's been carefully designed for that. A good mental image is powerful because if you choose it wisely, it will change an unhelpful mindset and replace it with a helpful one. So the last practice principle is what I call walking up the stairs. You have to introduce this skill step by step into progressively more stressful situations. So don't just try and use this on your next big project, your make or break opportunity. Figure out smaller opportunities to these mindsets and then practice them on progressively more stressful situations. And remember, your mind, brain, and body are a precision engineered machine. Sometimes you need the brake, and sometimes you need the accelerator. So get good at both. Then, choosing which mental skill to use for what's in front of you, that's the art. Thank you.